On the 8th day of this war, a man nobody outside Iran had heard of 10 days ago stood before the Assembly of Experts and accepted the title of Supreme Leader of the Islamic Republic of Iran. He did not look like someone who had just inherited a country under bombardment. He looked like someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. Mojtaba Khamenei, the younger son of the assassinated Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, was elected by unanimous vote within hours of his father's death becoming publicly confirmed. The IRGC pledged allegiance before the announcement was an hour old. The senior clerical establishment followed within the same news cycle. The chain of command did not fracture, it did not hesitate, it transferred. And his first public statement as Supreme Leader was not a call for ceasefire negotiations. It was not an appeal to international bodies. It was not the kind of measured diplomatic language a government uses when it is looking for an exit. It was a direct warning to the United States and Israel that what they have done to Iranian civilians, to Iranian children, to Iranian schools and hospitals and residential neighborhoods constitutes war crimes, and that those war crimes will carry a price, a heavy price, and that the Islamic Republic of Iran will be the one collecting it. Over the next few minutes, I am going to show you who Mojtaba Khamenei actually is, what his elevation means for the trajectory of this war, and why the specific language he chose in his first statement tells you more about where this conflict is going than anything either Washington or Jerusalem has said publicly this week. Before we continue, please subscribe and like the video. Your support is what keeps this reporting going. Now let's get into it. Here is what we know about the man who is now running Iran. Mojtaba Khamenei is 56 years old. He has spent virtually his entire adult life inside the institutional structures of the Islamic Republic, not as a public figure, but as a behind-the-scenes operator, with direct access to the most sensitive layers of the regime's security and intelligence architecture. He holds the clerical rank of Hojjatul Islam, one level below Grand Ayatollah, which made his elevation to Supreme Leader constitutionally irregular, under strict interpretations of the Velayat-e-Faqih doctrine that requires the position to be held by a qualified jurist of the highest rank. The Assembly of Experts resolved that irregularity by unanimous vote with a speed that suggested the outcome had been decided before the meeting began. His operational background is the part that matters most for understanding what his leadership will look like in practice. Mojtaba Khamenei served as a senior liaison between the Office of the Supreme Leader and the IRGC's Intelligence Directorate for more than a decade. He was not a figurehead in that role. According to multiple Western intelligence assessments published before this war began, he was actively involved in approving sensitive operations, coordinating between parallel intelligence structures, and managing the relationship between the Supreme Leader's office and the Quds Force, the IRGC unit responsible for extraterritorial operations across the region. He's reported to have been closely involved in Iran's proxy network management, including the coordination of Hezbollah's financial and weapon supply chains and the operational support structures for Houthi maritime operations in the Red Sea. This is not a transitional figurehead installed to hold a seat warm while the regime stabilizes. This is a man who was already operating at the functional center of the Islamic Republic's most sensitive decision-making before his father was killed. His elevation did not move him into a position of power. It formalized power he had already been exercising. Donald Trump called him a lightweight and predicted he would not last long. That assessment was made without public reference to any intelligence basis. The unanimous allegiance of the IRGC within hours of the announcement, the immediate alignment of the senior clerical establishment, and the uninterrupted continuation of missile wave operations throughout the transition period suggest a different picture than the one Trump described. Now look at the content of Mojtaba's first formal statement. Because the specific language he used was not rhetorical boilerplate, he used the phrase war crimes 4 times in a single statement. He specified the targeting of schools. He cited the death toll of children by name, referencing the strike that killed over 160 people at a primary school, the majority of them girls between the ages of 7 and 12. He named UNESCO's characterization of that strike as a grave violation of international humanitarian law. He named Human Rights Watch's call for a war crimes investigation. And then he stated, without qualification, that those responsible will pay a heavy price and that the Islamic Republic will not rest until accountability is delivered. That framing is significant for several reasons that go beyond the immediate rhetoric. By centering his first public statement on war crimes and civilian casualties, Mojtaba Khamenei is doing something his father rarely did at this level of specificity. He is constructing an international legal and moral framework around Iran's continued military operations. The message is not simply that Iran will retaliate. The message is that Iran's retaliation is justice, that the missile waves are not aggression but accountability, that every future wave of Operation True Promise 4 is a response to documented violations of international humanitarian law by the United States and Israel, and that the international community's failure to enforce those laws has left Iran as the only available enforcement mechanism. That framing is designed to do 2 things simultaneously. Domestically, it consolidates support by positioning the war as a righteous response to atrocity rather than a military confrontation. Iran is losing on the ground. Internationally, it is an appeal to every government watching this conflict that is not aligned with the U.S.-Israeli position, and there are many of them, to recognize the legitimacy of Iran's continued operations under a framework they are already publicly committed to supporting. The reaction from the international community to the school strike and to the accumulating civilian casualty count that now exceeds 300 killed, including 194 children, has been notably more divided than the reaction to Iran's missile operations. A number of governments that condemned Iran's ballistic missile launches in previous rounds of conflict have either remained silent on the civilian casualties in this one, or issued statements calling for investigation rather than condemnation. China published a formal statement calling for an independent international investigation into the school strike. Russia's foreign ministry used the phrase systematic targeting of civilian infrastructure in its characterization of the U.S.-Israeli campaign. The Organization of Islamic Cooperation convened an emergency session. 3 European governments that had publicly backed Israel's right to self-defense in previous conflicts issued separate statements expressing serious concern about proportionality and the protection of civilian life. That shift in tone across governments that Washington needs aligned is not yet a diplomatic crisis for the United States. But it is the early structure of one, and Mojtaba Khamenei is reading that shift correctly. He's feeding it with specific, documented, citation-sourced language that gives sympathetic governments the framework they need to move their positions further without appearing to be simply siding with Iran. That is not accidental rhetoric. That is a political operation running in parallel with the military one. That is the diplomatic space Mojtaba Khamenei is attempting to occupy and systematically widen. Now understand the operational context in which this political statement was delivered. Because the new Supreme Leader was not speaking from a position of military collapse. By the time Mojtaba delivered his statement, Iran had launched 30 confirmed waves of Operation True Promise 4, over 500 ballistic and naval missiles, nearly 2,000 drones, 40% aimed at Israel, 60% at American military assets across the region, 7 American service members confirmed dead. The Strait of Hormuz functionally closed, oil above $100 a barrel, the Bazan refinery in Haifa targeted for the second time in 9 months, the command facility used by Netanyahu during active operations struck with a deep penetrating ballistic missile. Iran absorbed over 2,000 U.S. and Israeli strikes across 26 of its 31 provinces and continued to prosecute the war without visible command breakdown. The IRGC chain of command held through the assassination of the Supreme Leader, through the targeted killing of senior aerospace force commanders, through the destruction of fuel infrastructure and missile production facilities, and through 9 days of sustained bombardment from 2 of the most advanced air forces on Earth. When Mojtaba Khamenei stood up and said the United States and Israel will pay a heavy price, he was not speaking from a position of desperation. He was speaking from the position of a regime that had just demonstrated in real time in front of the entire world that it could absorb an attack of historic scale and continue to function. That demonstration changes what the warning means. A warning from a government that is fracturing under military pressure is a signal of weakness trying to disguise itself. A warning from a government that transferred supreme command in under 8 hours, maintained missile operations throughout the transition, and installed a new leader with full IRGC backing is a strategic communication from an institution that believes it is still in the fight and intends to remain there. The question that matters now is what heavy price actually means in operational terms. Mojtaba is not the first Iranian leader to use this language, but he is the first to use it after 30 waves of retaliation. In the context of a documented and internationally condemned school strike, from the position of a regime whose command structure survived exactly the decapitation strike it was supposed to be destroyed by. The credibility behind the words is different from any previous iteration of this threat. The United States has not formally responded to the war crimes framing. The White House maintained its position that Iran's civilian casualties are a consequence of the regime's military co-location practices, placing military infrastructure near population centers, rather than a violation of international humanitarian law by U.S. and Israeli forces. That is a legally defensible position under existing laws of armed conflict. But legal defensibility and political sustainability in the international arena are different standards, and the accumulating civilian toll is creating diplomatic pressure in capitals that Washington needs aligned, that are watching the war crimes language in the UNESCO statements and calculating their own positions. Israel has not commented on the new Supreme Leader's statement beyond reiterating that the military campaign against Iran's military infrastructure will continue. Netanyahu's government characterized Mojtaba Khamenei's elevation as proof that the regime's leadership succession had failed to produce moderation. The missile waves that followed that characterization did not support it. Iran's President Pezeshkian issued a parallel statement reinforcing the war crimes framework and stating that Iran was prepared to present its case to every available international forum. That is the language of a government that intends to fight this war on multiple simultaneous tracks, kinetic operations continuing while a parallel diplomatic and legal campaign is built around the civilian casualty record. That dual-track strategy is more sophisticated than the single-dimension military confrontation that the White House appeared to anticipate when Operation Epic Fury was authorized. Share this with every person you know who thinks the regime in Tehran is on the verge of collapse. 8 days. A supreme leader assassinated, a new one, installed by unanimous IRGC allegiance within hours. 30 waves of retaliation continuing through the transition without pause. A first public statement built around war crimes, civilian casualties, and a promise of heavy accountability directed at both Washington and Jerusalem. An international legal and moral framework being constructed in real time around Iran's continued military operations. A diplomatic appeal to every government that has stayed quiet about the school strike and the children's death toll. And a new supreme leader with direct operational experience inside the IRGC's most sensitive decision-making structures, now holding the formal authority to match the informal power he has already been exercising for years. That is not a regime in its final days. That is a regime that just changed leadership under fire, maintained full operational continuity, and came out of the transition with a harder line and a broader international appeal than the one it went in with. And the price Mojtaba Khamenei promised? He has the weapons to make it real. Thanks a lot for watching. I really appreciate your support. Join the discussion in the comments below. Do you think the war crimes framing will shift international support away from the US and Israel? And what does a heavy price look like coming from a regime that just proved it can absorb this level of bombardment and keep fighting? Let me know. Please subscribe and like the video if you want to stay updated, and click the video on screen to see another one. I'll see you soon.